to 7 girls. The man escaped. Well, how could he not escape with such terrible service? These are the words of a mother, her accusations leveled against a demonic serial killer known as El Coqueto. He didn't attack just one woman, he attacked many. And he did it on the very same bus that hundreds of women boarded every single day. If you want to know all the details of this tragic case, I invite you to stay until the end. What happened to Cecilia Pérez Vargas? Eva Cecilia Pérez Vargas was a young woman full of life. She always wore a smile, a dreamer with a deep passion for animals. In 2011, at just 16 years old, she already knew she wanted to be a veterinarian or a marine biologist. She lived with her parents and 5 siblings in Tlalnepantla, in Mexico City. She was a girl like any other, with big dreams and a quiet routine. November 26th of that year was, by all appearances, just another day. Eva went to school, rehearsed for a play, and returned home as usual. After lunch, she asked for permission to go skating. Her mother recalled that at first they weren't convinced. They had already said no in the days prior, but her report card had just arrived and her grades were excellent, so they thought letting her go out for a while would be a fair reward. Eva put on her skates and her parents walked with her to the microbus stop. There she met up with her boyfriend. They agreed she would be home between 8:30 and 9 o'clock that night. They said their goodbyes. It was the last time her parents would see her alive. That night, Eva didn't come home. Her parents began calling her phone over and over, but there was no answer. Their anxiety spiked when they spoke to her boyfriend. He told them he had put her on the microbus that was supposed to take her home just 20 minutes earlier. The ride from that stop to her house took no more than 5 minutes. It was late, and the city traffic was light. Something didn't add up. Something was terribly wrong. Eva's older brothers went straight to the microbus terminal, the depot where all drivers must return with their vehicles at the end of their shift. Eva's boyfriend had described some features of the bus, so they thought they could identify it and ask the driver if he remembered anything. But they found no bus matching the description. And to their dismay, none of the other drivers offered any help or useful information. When Eva Cecilia didn't return, her family refused to sit idle. The very next day, accompanied by a friend who was a lawyer, they went directly to the public prosecutor's office to report her disappearance. But instead of support, they were met with indifference and mistreatment. No one seemed to take them seriously. They were reluctant to even file a report, and one official went so far as to insinuate that, with a little money, things might move along faster. It was a devastating blow. They were already living a nightmare, and now they felt completely abandoned by the authorities. Still, they managed to file the report, but what came next was even more frustrating. The agents repeated the same tired lines. The young woman had probably run off on her own. They should talk to the boyfriend. Maybe she was with friends. Nothing concrete, nothing helpful. The family, of course, did not wait. They started asking questions everywhere. They spoke to Eva's friends. They questioned the boyfriend again, wanting to understand what had happened and if he was telling the truth. But the young man stuck to his story. He had left her at the bus stop just like always. Several people had seen them together at the skating rink that day, and the timeline matched up. There were no contradictions. Everything indicated he had nothing to hide. So the family took the search into their own hands. Day after day, they went out into the streets, printing flyers, plastering them on posts in shops on public transport. They even invested in advertising to get Eva's photo into every corner of Mexico City. They did everything the authorities were not doing. Days turned into weeks. Nothing. Not a single lead. Then 2 weeks later, the calls began. They were from men who claimed to have Eva. They demanded a large sum of money for her release. They claimed to know things, speaking with a chilling confidence. The family, caught between anguish and fear, went to the authorities again. But once more there was no response. No one advised them. No one guided them. Fortunately, they decided not to pay. It was later confirmed that these men did not have Eva. They were opportunists, preying on the pain of a desperate family. A month had passed since Eva Cecilia disappeared. A month of uncertainty, of sleepless nights, of unanswered questions. Her mother's anguish grew with each passing day. On December 27, 2011, with her heart in pieces but still clinging to the hope of finding her daughter alive, she went directly to the Deputy Attorney General's office. She wanted to speak to someone, for someone to finally listen, for something concrete to be done. She could wait no longer. But once again, all she received was coldness and mistreatment. Instead of treating her with humanity, they met her with indifference. What they offered her was a stack of files, unsolved cases of young women who had recently been found dead. The officials, with no tact whatsoever, told her that if she wanted to find her daughter quickly, she should look through the files herself. The woman, completely broken but resolute, did not leave. She sat down with one of her sons and their lawyer friend, and they began to go through the reports one by one. Each file was a blow to the soul. They were the stories of other families, of other daughters who never came home, who, like Eva, had been silenced. And then among those documents they found one that made their blood run cold. The description matched Eva Cecilia's appearance, point by point. But what confirmed their worst fear was a detail that left no room for doubt. The young woman in the file was wearing the exact same clothes Eva had on the day she disappeared. The report stated that the body had been found on December 24th, just 3 days earlier, under a bridge in Tultitlan, state of Mexico. It was Christmas Eve. While many families were preparing to celebrate, another was living its worst nightmare. The coroner's report was clear. The cause of death was asphyxiation. The body showed signs of violence, and all evidence pointed to a brutal attack. Furthermore, several of her personal belongings were missing, including her cell phone. Nearly 2 more months passed with no real progress, but on February 26, 2012, an arrest was finally made. The key was an unexpected report. A woman with no idea of the chain of events her decision would set in motion went to the authorities to report something that didn't feel right. Back in November 2011, her husband had given her a cell phone. He claimed he had bought it at a pawn shop. The woman began using the phone, but while looking through it, she found something disturbing. Photographs of an unknown young woman, a girl who was not part of her family, someone she didn't recognize. Days later, while out on the street, she saw one of the posters announcing the disappearance of Eva Cecilia. And then it all clicked. The young woman in the photos on the phone was the same one from the posters. There was no doubt. With that information, she decided to act. She went straight to the police and filed a report. Thanks to that courageous act, they were able to capture Cesar Armando Librado Legorreta, known as El Coqueto. Cesar Armando Librado Legorreta, the 29-year-old man arrested for Eva Cecilia's murder, had a personal history marked by violence and abandonment from childhood. He grew up without a father figure. His relationship with his dad was practically non-existent. But he found no refuge with his mother either. On the contrary, it was reported that his mother abused him both physically and verbally, showing little interest in caring for him or his brother. It was his grandmother who, in the midst of the family chaos, ended up taking on the role of primary caregiver. His childhood was marked not only by neglect at home, but also by humiliation at school. During his adolescence, in an attempt to connect with someone, he confessed his feelings to a female classmate. But the girl not only rejected him, she did it in front of everyone. The scene became a source of constant ridicule from his peers. With an unstable family life and a hostile school environment, Cesar Armando started working at a very young age. By 15, he was already driving a microbus, and it was the only type of job he would ever have. Over the years, he bounced from route to route, unable to hold down a job for long. His behavior made it difficult to get along with anyone. At 20, he married a woman named America, and they had 2 children. However, his home life didn't seem to have changed much. His co-workers described him as aggressive, rude, and unpleasant to be around. He didn't maintain close relationships with other drivers. In fact, he was widely disliked. He was often seen shouting obscenities at women on the street, or even at female passengers who boarded his bus. His attitude was confrontational, and fights, some of them physical, with his colleagues were not uncommon. As an employee, he was also irresponsible. He was assigned a driving shift that started at 3 o'clock p.m. and was supposed to run past midnight. However, he often didn't start his shift until 7 or 8 at night and would continue driving until 3 or 4 in the morning. He didn't follow the assigned route, failed to clock in, and often didn't return the vehicle on time, leaving the next driver waiting for hours. Although Cesar Armando Librado Legorreta, El Coqueto, was initially arrested only for the murder of Eva Cecilia, subsequent investigations revealed that his criminal history was far more extensive and terrifying. Based on an analysis of police files, his own confession, and especially the composite sketch provided by a surviving victim, authorities were able to charge him with a total of 8 rapes and 7 murders. One of the most shocking moments of the case was the release of a recorded statement in which he coldly described his modus operandi. The recording quickly went viral on social media and was broadcast by news outlets across the country, generating a mixture of outrage, horror, and despair throughout society. In his confession, El Coqueto explained that he never planned his crimes in advance. In his own words, he acted on impulse, taking advantage of the circumstances of the moment. His hunting ground was the microbus he drove. It was there that he chose his victims, women traveling alone, usually late at night or very early in the morning when the streets were empty and the bus was nearly deserted. He also targeted women who, out of exhaustion or distraction, fell asleep during the journey or missed their stop. A strategy he often repeated was to fake a mechanical failure. He would stop the bus, get out, and pretend to check something. He would tell the remaining passenger not to worry, that he would take her a few more blocks or help her get to her destination. But instead of following the established route, he would take a detour to a deserted area. There he would commit his crimes. Cesar Armando also revealed a chilling fact. His first victim did not die. He thought she had, but she hadn't. The young woman, in a desperate act of survival, had played dead so that he would stop attacking her, allowing her to escape. This woman later had the courage to report the crime. Thanks to her testimony, the authorities had a precise description of the attacker and a composite sketch, which later proved to be remarkably similar to Cesar Armando's appearance when he was captured. The most devastating part of all this is that Eva Cecilia was not his last victim. While her family was out every day, putting up posters with her face, while they pleaded for help from authorities who wouldn't listen, while they received empty responses like, "She probably ran off with her boyfriend," or "She'll be back," Cesar Armando was still raping and murdering. We can never know for certain if a faster response from the authorities, an immediate, serious, and sustained investigation from day one, would have saved the lives of any of the women who fell into his hands. What is clear is that for a long time, this man operated with total impunity from his own workplace, the microbus. Day after day, he moved freely through the streets, picking up passengers with no one suspecting what was truly happening. After each attack, he had a macabre ritual. He always stole belongings from his victims, not just as part of the crime, but to keep an object as a trophy. But he didn't keep all of these items for himself. On more than one occasion, as he recounted in his confession, he gave some of these belongings to his wife. Cesar Armando was convinced that not even she would notice, that she would never suspect that these things, an accessory, a cell phone, a piece of clothing, came from women he himself had violated and murdered. In his official statement, which was videotaped and later circulated on social media and in the news, he provided a horrifying amount of detail. He remembered his crimes with pinpoint accuracy. Dates, times, the routes where he picked up the victims, how he identified them, how he gained their trust, and the moment he carried out his attacks. Before these identifications, the police had already tried to make progress through other means. One effort was to trace the cell phone of another victim, Sereni Diana, which the attacker had pawned. The device's IMEI number was still active, which allowed them to track it to a woman who had purchased it. This buyer had no connection to El Coqueto. She had simply gone to the pawn shop and bought the phone like anyone else. However, the lead proved useless. The pawn shop did not provide any substantial information to the police, and the trail went cold. Everything seemed to have stalled again. It was, ironically, the killer's own carelessness that allowed the circle to finally close. His fatal error, the one that led to his capture, was a simple, almost thoughtless act: gifting his wife a cell phone. He couldn't have known she would recognize it from the news reports of a widely publicized disappearance. Had it not been for that single mistake, it's chilling to consider that he might still be free. Perhaps he would still be driving his minibus. Perhaps he would still be preying on the innocent, or worse, his crimes might have remained forever unsolved. And so, while the police celebrated the long-awaited capture of Cesar Armando, the sense of victory was fleeting. The grim reality of what had transpired, the sheer scale of the damage and the lives lost due to delayed action, weighed too heavily for any true celebration. Just as the authorities held a press conference, proudly announcing the capture of Cesar Armando Librado Legorreta, also known as El Coqueto, the unthinkable happened. The criminal escaped in the early hours of February 28, 2012, a mere day and a half after his formal arrest. He was still in custody inside the Deputy Attorney General's office building. A team of agents was assigned to guard him through the night. He was cuffed at the wrists and ankles, and escape seemed impossible. But the guards later confessed that exhaustion had overwhelmed them. They had fallen asleep. In that moment of negligence, Cesar Armando seized his chance. He later recounted how he injured one of his hands while struggling with the cuffs. Still, he managed to break free. To remove the ankle restraints, he had to contort his feet in an incredible feat of flexibility, forcing his joints until he was completely unbound. Once free, he slipped out of a window and rappelled down from the third floor using a makeshift rope of cables. For several days, he vanished without a trace. The news of his escape ignited a national scandal. To repair the damage, authorities offered a 1 million peso reward for any information leading to his whereabouts. Within hours, El Coqueto's face was inescapable, plastered across news broadcasts, newspapers, social media, and wanted posters in cities nationwide. A massive federal operation was launched, with hundreds of agents dedicated to the manhunt. In a matter of days, he became one of the most wanted men in all of Mexico. Finally, on March 3, 2012, a crucial tip, not from the official investigation but from an outside source, led police to his hiding place. The information came from his sister-in-law, the wife of his half-brother. She had gone to visit an aunt on Cesar Armando's father's side of the family. Upon arriving, she saw him, recognized him instantly, and understanding the gravity of the situation, made the decision to alert the authorities. He had sought refuge there precisely because he had little contact with that branch of his family, believing no one would ever think to look for him. When agents finally cornered Cesar Armando Librado Legorreta at his aunt's house, they immediately noticed he was severely injured. The most serious wounds were to his spine and right leg. He struggled to move, and it was clear he had been without proper medical care for days. During questioning, he confessed that he had sustained the injuries during his escape. As he descended the facade of the building using the makeshift cables, he slipped and fell from a significant height. The impact was brutal. Unable to stand, he dragged himself to the street. In the darkness, writhing in pain, he managed to flag down a driver, feeding him a lie that he had just been the victim of a hit and run. The driver, seeing his condition, agreed to help. But when offered a ride to the hospital, Cesar Armando refused. Instead, he insisted on being taken to his brother's house. Once there, his brother, unsure of what to do, called their mother for guidance. Her response was chillingly direct. She wanted nothing to do with him. She told her son to take him to his father. But his father offered no sanctuary either, simply sending him on to an aunt's house under the pretense that he would be sorter there. When the family was later questioned about his condition, they concocted a story claiming he had been kidnapped and released in that state. During his time in hiding, Cesar Armando had tried to alter his appearance by shaving his head, but his efforts were futile. He was essentially bedridden, with very limited mobility, and he never sought formal medical attention. In fact, doctors later confirmed that if he had gone just a few more days without treatment, he could have suffered irreversible damage, potentially losing the ability to walk forever. Following his recapture, he was taken directly to a hospital for specialized care. Over time, he regained movement in his legs. Once he was stable, the judicial process against him officially began. The sheer scale of his crimes, the brutality of his actions, and the number of victims involved ensured the case dominated national headlines. Public opinion was fixated on every detail, awaiting the final punishment for the man who had terrorized so many women and destroyed so many lives. The trial concluded with a historic sentence: 240 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay 94,000 Mexican pesos in damages to each of the affected families, as well as to the young survivor who was the only one to escape his grasp. Initially, the combined sentences for his many counts of rape and murder totaled 381 years. However, due to legal provisions and his voluntary confession, the sentence was reduced. The final term was set at 240 years. While the number may seem symbolic, in practice, it is a life sentence. At 30 years old at the time of his conviction, Cesar Armando will undoubtedly spend the rest of his days behind bars. What do you think about the fact that it was a woman close to him who ultimately helped bring him to justice? And how does it feel to know that many lives could have been saved if action had been taken sooner? We want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments.